So this is to open up the discussion a bit more and look at some of the aspects, both at the macro level, but more specifically at the net good framework. Immediately on my left, I have Mike Berners-Lee, who is the founder director of Small World Consulting, and as you heard, talks about, works on understanding emissions in the supply chain, but also visualizing and understanding what carbon means for people. And he wrote a well-known book called How Bad Are Bananas? The Carbon Footprint of Everything. And he may allude to that in a bit. Next to Mike is Tom DeLay, who is, since its founding in 2001, the chief executive of the Carbon Trust, which was originally set up to help UK businesses understand and manage their carbon footprint, and has now branched out, works in China, Korea, Mexico and Brazil, and has helped companies save nearly £5 billion through reducing their carbon footprint. Next to Tom is Paul Crewe, who is the head of sustainability, engineering, energy and environment at Sainsbury's. As you all know, Sainsbury's is a true leader in the retail sector in terms of cutting emissions and reducing energy. He leads Sainsbury's work across a whole range of areas, engineering, built environment, and enabling them to reach their ambitious emissions reductions targets, and also sits on the Sainsbury's Climate Change Board. And at the end, I've already introduced Kevin Moss. So I should warn you now, there will not be an opportunity, I'm afraid, for Q&A, partly because of the way we're streaming this live. However, there will be a break after this. The panelists, including myself, will be available to answer questions. And then, of course, we've got a much more interactive session just after the break, where you will be able to either collar people and ask them questions individually or get involved in the broader discussion, which I hope the panelists will bring up some interesting ideas. So, Tom, starting with you. An international survey that the Carbon Trust itself conducted suggested that nearly half of executives believe that doing things like this, cutting emissions, dealing with sustainability, reduces profits and is bad for business. So why on earth should BT be doing something like this?
Yeah, okay. That's what they told us. We went to 5 countries globally, almost 500 senior executives from a very similar demographic. Told us just that. I think the simple story is that almost any business can achieve significant benefit, tangible benefit, through cost saving, through efficiency. Not just energy efficiency, efficiency more broadly across pretty much every area of operation. And that's pretty much true for any business in any sector. And then there are the benefits that you can get through enhancing your revenues, and those are perhaps more focused in certain sectors where consumers really value the environmental message and are willing to enhance the revenue line if a company does the right thing. So on paper, we can do that, and we're pretty sure the $5 billion that we saved is true. It is over an awful lot of companies, but efficiency really does pay off. So why would people come back and say, well, not for us right now, thank you? I think there are a couple of things. Firstly, the companies that we interviewed said, well, about 60% of them talked about rising costs to do with environmental compliance. And then they said not only is it rising costs, but they also see the quality of what they offer going down. About 30% said no, they could see a quality fall off. Combination of rising costs and the quality of the product offer going down, that's going to hit your profits in the short term. So I think there are a couple of things. Firstly, most of these people were responding in the relatively short term, and they were not willing to accept that you do need to invest time, effort and resource, and in some cases a significant financial contribution to achieve much of what BT are looking to achieve here. So there is this, are we willing to invest right now? And this is a particularly bad time, I think, in the economic cycle to look for many businesses to invest. But beyond that, there's something else, because there's some equation that's got to make this sensible for BT and other leading companies and not for others. And we've certainly picked up that strip out things like sector bias, leading companies are more likely to be investing in what is environmentally sustainable than companies that are not leading, pretty much across all sectors that we've worked with. And I think that's in part, Ian referred to BT's ambition to be a good business and how that would come across to consumers of the future. It does come down to brand loyalty. We did extensive surveys globally on brand loyalty. Over 80% of young Chinese consumers, the Generation Y, will be more loyal to a brand that they see is taking appropriate steps to reduce carbon footprint and environmental impact. Sadly, in the UK, that figure of 83% falls back to 56. In fact, of the 6 countries that we looked at, UK young people were the least engaged in this. But if you are a big global business, you are going to be looking to the consumers of the future. And brand loyalty is enormously valuable to you as a business. And I think that is why leading businesses say, okay, it might be a short-term inconvenience, it might be a short-term investment, but it's the right thing to do in the medium to long term. I think Ian spoke very well to that.
But which is the cause and the effect? I mean, there's some quite well-known research, for example, recently in Harvard Business Review, suggesting that those that had companies that had sustainability at the heart of their business strategies outperformed their peers. Is that because they had sustainability strategies, or they're already outperforming and therefore could afford to do a bit of environment?
I think there's a bit of both. We've looked for the financial correlation between environmental performance and financial performance, and you can find it. But to say it is absolutely rock solid, I think will be unfair. I think within certain sectors, you can certainly prove it. There are certain sectors that are inherently going to help the world be a better place, that are going to help us reduce our personal carbon footprint. If we take an average for the UK of about 14 tonnes of CO2 per person on an aggregate basis, the global average is 4. If we actually want to get climate change under control, we're going to have to get the global average of 4 down to 2. So we've actually got to make some really big steps. Now, some sectors are probably better placed to make some of those big steps happen. And I think BT and the work in communications is a good example of the right company in the right sector doing the right thing.
Okay, one obviously a very competitive sector, rather like the food retailing or broader retailing sector. Paul, I mean, Sainsbury's in a very competitive environment, and yet you have, the business has grown and you've set yourself ambitious targets, internal emissions and also around your products. Why are you doing it? Why don't you just get on and sell food?
I think if you think back to Sainsbury's history, we're 143 plus years old. And when you go back to when we first opened our very first shop in Drury Lane in 1869, the absolute aim of the Sainsbury's family at that point was to have the best butter in London. It was at the time when food wasn't safe. And at the time, retailers weren't trusted. So for us, this is absolutely about doing the right thing. And for Sainsbury's, when we talk about our 20 by 20 sustainability plan that we launched in November 2011, we were very conscious that we didn't want to be embroiled in the greenwash scenario. And we were absolutely committed with the board, through Justin and my CFO, leading what it is we wanted to be strive to do and to achieve. And fundamentally, the whole of the 20 by 20 plan that we put in place is absolutely doing it for the right commercial reasons and absolutely doing it for the right reasons for the environment. Our 20 by 20 plan is an absolute stretch. I was really pleased to see Ian talk about not necessarily having all the answers known, and it's a bold step to take. Within Sainsbury's, absolutely, I can assure you that when we set out on our strategy for a 20 by 20 plan, of course we knew some of the answers, but we still haven't got some of the answers yet to get us to where we want to get to. And for me, it's around, I would rather shoot for the stars and land on the moon than not shoot at all. And I think seeing BT's approach, taking that bold step of going into that unknown is vitally important. The thing for me, though, is having those key milestones along the way. So the way in which Sainsbury's allow us to work in that competitive market is by trialling and testing and being brave and being bold and looking to adopt those technologies or those principles that may be a little bit groundbreaking. And then as soon as they're proven to work, adopt them very quickly into our DNA and roll them back into our estate as quickly as possible. And really having those drum beats of proving to the board's very important to me. It's where the majority of all the decisions that I have to take are made. And by showing and proving and showing and telling what it is we can achieve and showing the commercial aspects and the commercial viability does work.
Thanks. So Mike, both Sainsbury's and BT have big supply chains. We've seen from Kevin's slide, 64%, I think it was, of the emissions come from the supply chain. How do companies manage that bit of it? I mean, it's relatively easy to measure your buildings and your transport and so on and so forth. These are people all over the world, maybe not measuring very well. How do you deal with that?
Well, Kevin's right that supply chains are very complex, and where the carbon comes from within the supply chains is in fact it's hideously complex. So there are suppliers and suppliers, suppliers and suppliers, 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 and actually that process goes on forever. And if you really want to look at all the carbon in your supply chain, somehow you have to find a way of estimating what's going on in literally endless supply chains. And I think the sort of apparent complexity of that has put a lot of people off for a long time, but the reality is that whilst it will never be possible to be absolutely exact about it, it turns out to be absolutely possible and also very practical to make realistic, meaningful estimates of what's going on. And that process is really important. It's about practical and robust management information, and we are improving the techniques for that all of the time. And BT's taken a really good step in saying, okay, despite the fact that it isn't perfect, this information is critical to us, it's really important, and so we're going to do our best with it. And it turns out to be a process which, it is entirely practical, and it gives an intelligent steer on where the priorities are in terms of carbon management, which is what the whole game is about. All carbon metrics are about practical management information. And we can develop that instinct, and we can get it out to into the public as well. And step one is to make sure that the company itself has a really good instinct for where all the carbon issues are in and around the business.
So, I mean, one of those things is, you talk about understanding that. As I say, you can understand it within your own company. I mean, I would imagine both Sainsbury and BT have suppliers in, if not every country in the world, a very large number of them, where perhaps that understanding isn't already in place or isn't well developed, or certainly, thinking about the survey you mentioned earlier, seen as dealing with carbon or the environment as something that is a competitive disadvantage. How do you make that case? I mean, both from the work you've done, and I'd like to hear from the others as well, how they do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's increasingly well understood now that if we're going to take carbon seriously on every scale, at a global scale, at a national scale, in businesses and as individuals, we need to understand not just our direct carbon impacts, but also the indirect carbon impacts that lie behind everything that we do. And that case is being increasingly understood in the UK government has been clear. The Select Committee on Energy and Climate Change has reported that the UK absolutely should have consumption-based metrics that track that indirect carbon, and the entirely analogous decision would be for BT to say, yes, our indirect carbon matters too, is important to us as well, because it is, for many businesses, most businesses, it is a bigger deal than the emissions from their own direct energy use.
So what challenges, Kevin, working on your extended own footprint before we come to the beyond the footprint, what challenges have you had? I guess the procurement part of your company says, well, let's just get it in as subject to quality as cheap as we possibly can, and you're saying, well, actually, no, we want to do a bit more than that.
Yes, and some of them are here today who are cringing as you say that. So some of my colleagues are here today from the procurement team, and we are very much focused in the mix of good quality, good price, also is good sustainability. So we've been working with suppliers for a number of years on a sort of a threshold level of, there's a set of questionnaires they have to fill in and they get an audit if they don't get above a certain level, to moving on to encouraging them to participate in the Carbon Disclosure Project, and then working with them in person or through webinars on helping them with how they can improve their energy footprint. What this gives us is the ability to then say to them, here's how you fit into our whole. So whereas previously the activities were isolated activities, we can now say to them, so here's our big picture and here's where you fit into that. And it allows us to prioritize our activities in the right place with the right suppliers and the right parts of our business.
And do you select your suppliers on the basis of them meeting the highest standards in terms of sustainability as well as other criteria?
We include that in the criteria. So a business manager working with their procurement manager can assign up to 50. We have a balanced scorecard for how we pick suppliers, and can assign up to 15 percentage points. It's up to 15. But I'm glad we brought you along to help me with my numbers. Up to 15 percentage points to the decision process according to energy and sustainability criteria. So yes, it's absolutely one of the factors.
Okay, now turning to the even more complicated bit, which is net good. The suppliers, they've got a vested interest in satisfying you because you're buying from them. The 3 times impact that you're going to achieve through net good, a bunch of people you don't necessarily know. Some of them are your customers, some of them are the customers of your customers. So there are 2 questions. That's a complicated bunch of people, why bother? And second, how are you going to get to them? I mean, you don't have that leverage that you have through your contracting and your procurement.
On the customer side?
On the customer side.
So the why bother is from a medium to long-term point of view as a company, the planet is going to become more resource constrained, whether it's carbon or other resources. And this helps us to position ourselves to thrive as a business in that environment rather than it become a challenge as a business. There will always be some challenges of resource constraints, but if we can use this to position ourselves in the medium and long term to thrive, this will help us get there. We see our customers are starting to ask us more and more about this. Some of our global customers, when we design a network for them, they want to know the carbon footprint of that network. And they want to know if we can design a network with a smaller carbon footprint. So they're not asking us as much as the sustainability guy would like, but they're asking us. And we see that building up. So the customers do want this. And this is partly a sort of a chicken and egg of us helping them understand how we can help them, and them asking us to help them to build towards it. So I see the 3 very much as a medium to long-term play as a business anyway, and it helps us with our market-facing units and with driving innovation.
Yeah, I'll just come on to a good example out of the Net Good programme. Some of the areas of customer activity that would give the greatest benefit in terms of reaching 3 to 1 are all around audio conferencing and telecommuting. So very significant potential impact, therefore worth really trying to analyse as best as we could. But interestingly, the abatement counts towards 3-1, but it also counts potentially towards the footprint of the business that is actually doing that itself. So if you have a business customer, it will be something that you will appropriately count as part of BT's global impact, but it's something that will be part of that business's direct footprint if they count theirs. So there is really a mutuality of interest along the supply chain. And if one can make that work through programs such as this, really gaining traction, you can see how the multiplier effect starts to kick in. What BT does, because it's right for BT, becomes what the next company in the supply chain does because it's right for them, and so on. So I think there really is something you can leverage here.
Right. So, I mean, and a lot of that depends on consumers, whether they be business customers or individual customers, sort of be able to understand this. Mike, how bad is a banana is about understanding the impact, the carbon footprint of products and services, and people need to be able to engage with that. And I'd ask you about it more generally, and then Paul specifically. Engaging customers to actually think about this is the first step to making them care about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's at face value, it's quite a complex scene. What are the carbon impacts that a consumer faces, let's take an end consumer, in everything about their daily life, because you can't see the carbon that's lying down the supply chains of everything they buy and do. But it is absolutely possible to impart that information in a way that is not instantly overnight and not exactly. But the good news is we don't need exact carbon instincts, but we do need broad understanding. So a little bit like we all have an instinct for money. So, I'd buy anyone in this room a cup of tea without even thinking about it, but I'd be unlikely to spontaneously buy anyone a house because I kind of understand that one's, many times more expensive than the other. And if we can get that kind of understanding out to the wider world, over time, that's an entirely doable exercise. And it's not about blasting numbers all over people. At all. It's about simple messages, and if BT can get a very good understanding of where the carbon issues are in and around its business, in its supply chains and in its users, and then just make sure that the simple communications it has with its customers are consistent with that, and are consistent with helping them to focus on where the genuine priorities are, then it's a doable exercise.
I mean, one of the challenges, and Paul, looking at business that deals with lots of customers across a range of products, is that we are bombarded with information. So how do you sell this to your customers? This is something that's important. So there are lots of other important things as well, but this is very important, and it's going to be good for you and good for us and good for the world, and therefore it's worth buying this product rather than that product, or engaging in this process rather than another.
Yeah, I think if you think back to sort of the earlier question around what a customer is. Now, we have an enormous supply chain that works for Sainsbury's, no doubt the same with BT. And although they're supplying us, they're also our customers too. And for me, it's around what lengths will we go to work with our suppliers to make them or help themselves to become more efficient and more carbon effective. So we've captured that originally as part of our 20 by 20 strategy to help our suppliers become much more efficient in the way they operate carbon. And secondly, from a customer perspective, it's really understanding and talking to them and really asking those questions internally before the customers ask of us. So we have, an important value chain within Sainsbury's where, we have 153,000 customers that work for us, our colleagues. So it's great for us to tap into those and ask them what it is it makes their lives more important and what is it they would like us to share with them and work with them on in all matters of sustainability, from whether that be from the products that we purchase outside of the UK, in Africa or Asia, right way through to the farm that's down the road from their local store. And for me, it's been really clear on what it is the customer is absolutely wanting to know and is focused on.
Kevin, have you sounded out your customers on this?
Yeah, and actually I think there's some interesting contrasts. If I think of myself picking up a piece of fruit, for example, I don't want to oversimplify, but I do have an interest in where that comes from. I don't think as a consumer I actually have the same interest in where my phone comes from. There isn't quite that same emotional connection of is it a New Zealand, maybe I shouldn't guess places, but a New Zealand apple or a South African apple perhaps, with a phone. So I'm not sure that this is the reason a customer's going to buy from us, because we've got this. For business customers, we actually need to show them how we can help them with what they need. For a consumer customer, we need to show them why our product is better still. Right? We still need to show them that and persuade them with that. This might contribute a bit towards the trust of the brand, but then we have to work out behind the scenes how this builds us towards the 3-to-1, and we have to set up our portfolio such that we move more in that direction and still make a healthy profit. Even though Ian's not quite here now, you'd need me to say that.
Okay. Well, thinking about profit, a traditional way that companies have made profit in the past is they invent something, they innovate it, they hide it, they put it behind very, very high walls, avoid it being leaked out, and then try and make money on it while the other people copy it, and then they've got ahead and innovated something new. So you're doing something innovative in terms of process, in terms of where you run your business, and before you've even started, you're throwing it out to the public and saying, copy us, imitate us, and in fact beat us. Why are you doing that?
I'm beginning to wonder whether I should have now. Can we pull it back quickly? Can we switch the website off? Because really, I addressed this earlier. We don't expect to make a profit from the net good methodology. We do expect it to be something that helps our business to innovate, that drives our business towards innovation, helps direct us towards the opportunity side of a resource-constrained planet, as well as understanding and preparing for the sort of the negative impacts of that. So it helps move us in that direction. But as I said, we want our customers to move there too, and we want our suppliers to move there too. And the more we can share that methodology, the more we can do that. I think one of the most interesting parts of being in the sustainability space is where do you draw the line between collaboration and when something becomes competitively valuable? So in fact, for this, because if I help you with where we've drawn that line, we've shared the methodology, we've shared the individual metrics, so you can look up in the document that we've shared that the Carbon Trust helped us put together, the metric that will allow you to work out the carbon emissions per use of teleconferencing or the carbon emissions saved per use of field force automation. What we haven't shared, because that's where it becomes competitively valuable, is our volumes. So that's where we've chosen to draw the line. We've produced enough information that someone else can replicate, but there's a point where we've said, okay, that point is of competitive value, and we're keeping that bit to ourselves.
And what are you hoping from, not only today and on July the 2nd, you've got the Better Future Forum, what are you hoping to get out of it, both in terms of, you talk about this as something which will drive your innovation, but also more broadly, why do it like this?
we want input from others. So actually in the room today are representatives from a number of different parts of BT. We have a board called the CSRB, which is a board committee that governs our process. We have members, Lord Hastings here, from the CSRB. We have members from the SBLT, which is the executive level board that sits below that helps us run this on an operational basis, and representatives from every one of our lines of business. So one of the things we hope today will give people the opportunity to engage with people, not just me from group, corporate, I sit in the middle and in the ivory tower type stuff, but people who are actually in the lines of business and engage in conversations as to how does this impact our different lines of business. The lines of business have all been involved in putting this together. We've done this with a virtual team across the business, and that will give us the input for the next iteration of this. How can we enhance it? How can we improve it? Where are the opportunities? And that's one of the things we hope will come out, especially from the workshop session this afternoon, where there's opportunity for smaller discussions in groups of 10 or so to really engage with each other and with our people. And then we want to enhance this. And
Tom, Carbon Trust works with lots and lots of companies. Are you seeing this sort of open source collaborative approach as being a new normal, or is it still sort of fairly isolated?
I think it's increasingly common for leading organisations, and they are organisations who have nothing to fear and who have an awful lot of opportunity to pursue, and I think that's great, and I think BT is a great example of that. Something came up actually in the work we did here, looking at BT Vision and the abatement potential, essentially, of having streamed media as opposed to the video coming through the letterbox, or you having to drive to get it, or indeed being delivered by post. A few years back, we were approached by Love Film, who wanted us to say that yes, Love Film was fundamentally a low carbon service. And we would have worked with Love Film on that. The only thing was we couldn't work out whether the business as usual to compare it to was driving to the video store or doing it by post, and how we would trade that off. Now, in this case, actually, the BT Vision abatement is all based around a weighted average of those two modes of delivery. Now, anybody here can go online and they'll be able to look at and say, okay, how would that have been? Do I agree with that or don't I agree with that? If you don't agree with that, you can actually run the numbers in your way. You can actually adapt what BT have done to the circumstances of your business. So I think there is an enormous benefit to businesses who want to do the right thing, to do it in a very transparent way, because I think they will get all the benefit and credit for having laid out not only their own performance, but the assumptions that underlie that, as opposed to a business that just says, we're great, trust us, and nobody does.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that, trust and transparency are absolutely key to all of this. So the numbers are complex, and it's possible to cook up anything in a black box if you put your mind to it. So this relies on BT being trusted, and it also relies on anyone who wants to being able to pick their way right back through every last line of the methodology if they've got a mind to do so. Yeah.
One of the things I just want to pick up, Kevin mentioned earlier about collaboration and sharing. I think for me, I take Sainsbury's as an example. We've kept our light under a bushel for many years, and I think one of the things that we really understand, probably more than our competition currently, is collaboration and sharing, and not keeping things behind an ivory tower is absolutely essential. And there are a few organisations that have taken the plunge like BT have done, and last year we really put our neck on the blocks, and Jim's here now from Green Mondays, where we held an event where we absolutely went naked. The board, we were with our peer group in a quite a challenging environment at Green Mondays, and we were there to bare our souls, all of our inner secrets that are no longer secrets. Because fundamentally, for me, it's around, sustainability and doing the right thing isn't a secret, because if all of us in our industries were to do the right thing, we would gain those economies of scale, and we would be able to accelerate things at a much quicker pace. And I'm all for that.
And thinking about this, Tom, this methodology, the sort of net positive, net good, going beyond your own footprint, is that something that is little niche market, it's fashionable this year and we hope it'll last, but it may not? Or is this something you're seeing other companies going, actually, this is the future, this is the way of really putting sustainability, climate change at the heart of our business strategies?
I mean, I think most companies now have a reasonable handle on their direct environmental impact. Describe Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions. They have a reasonable handle on that. That's what's within their own boundaries. And they kind of feel an obligation that if you can't get that right, you shouldn't really be signing your director's report, as indeed you won't be able to going forward. Then I think an increasing number of companies are recognising that you look along your supply chain, because actually an awful lot of benefits you can derive will be through the efficiency of your supply chain. And for an awful lot of companies, frankly, their direct impact is nothing compared to the impact implied by the products that come through the supply chain. For most retailers, it's a 10-to-1 ratio. So you've really got to start looking up your supply chain. And a smaller number, but I have to say a growing number, are starting to look at the abatement potential within their own consumer sets, and that's very important. Now, it does depend which sector you're looking at. If you're in the automotive sector, you're going to say, interestingly, however efficient my production is going to be and whatever improvement I can make there, actually, if I can make a car significantly more energy efficient and fuel efficient, then it's going to have, over its lifetime, a much bigger benefit in terms of the consumer, the buyer, using it than anything that we can do. So actually there are some sectors where there is a greater focus, I think, on the abatement in the consumption phase. At the end of the day, you've got to look end to end. If we actually want to reduce our average footprint down from where we are today to a global average of 2, well, the 14 in the UK and developed countries is going to have to come down very, very appreciably. And the only way we can do that is if we understand it on a consumption basis.
So how transferable is this kind of methodology? I mean, obviously, if we look at the use of telecommuting or audio conferencing, video conferencing, the argument is you're substituting that for a journey.
Yeah.
If we were talking about an automobile company, yes, I'm buying a more efficient car, but wouldn't I be better off not buying the car at all, or buying the petrol, or whatever it may be? And so, you can see the case here. You could also say, in the case of Sainsbury's, just don't go, buy less, eat less. We've got an obesity epidemic in this country, as in many parts of the world. Eat less. But now that's obviously not practical. How can we translate this methodology to other sectors, and how useful can it be?
I think the methodology is a great example, very relevant to this sector and to a number of other comparable sectors. I think as you go outside that into the broader environment, some sectors this just won't work for. It does depend on the relative balance of whether the impact is in the company itself or in its use or in the use of its products. It depends on a lot of factors such as the geography and other things that one can look at in some detail. I think it is relevant. I think there's almost no sector that couldn't do this kind of calculation. The answer wouldn't be 3-to-1. I think 3-to-1 to some degree reflects the specifics of communications and BT's opportunity in this sector. I think if you looked at other sectors, you might find in some cases you're never going to do better than go neutral. In others, you might be 5-to-1, 10-to-1. So I think that will vary very much by sector. But the basic approach of understanding, what your own individual impact is, what the impact of your supply chain is, what the impact of your own impact, including supply chain, on your consumers is, adding the lot together, doing a ratio, I think that is absolutely transferable.
Paul?
Yeah, if I think about Sainsbury's and what our approach is, I say we've got, we use the farm to fork scenario, so the end-to-end process of growing to consuming, and we've got 20,000 plus farmers and suppliers that work just for our own brand alone. So it's a big number, and a bit like the old adage, how far do you eat an elephant? You can't eat it all at once. It's an impossibility. But absolutely, what we've been working on with our supply chain is actually work on specific sustainable sourcing areas. And if I give you a really good example, so in dairy, we've taken dairy very seriously. It is a big carbon contributing animal. The cow, and fundamentally, we've really worked with every single farm that supplies Sainsbury's with milk, and we share information, we share best practice. It's an open book. We share all of our intimate secrets or non-secrets with them, just to make sure that they're all on a level playing field. And we're seeing some fantastic successes, and now that's been replicated across other development groups: chickens, pork, pigs, arable. So we're seeing that absolutely once the suppliers start to hear what benefits they're getting from that group, other groups are starting to want to be formed. And they're coming to us, asking us to form their sustainable development group, rather than me telling them. It's a great place to be.
Okay.
I do think, being in the ICT sector, I'm in a fortunate position that the metric on the positive side is the same as the metric on the negative side. I can come up with a metric that works on both sides. I think that the underlying question, though, for other companies is it forces you to ask the question, what is the value I bring to society and the environment? And it might be that your negative value is environment, but your positive value is nutrition or quality of life. So it's harder to quantify because it's very hard to work out what the currency exchange rate is between quality of life and environment, perhaps. Although the way Mike's smiling, it sounds like he might have worked some out. But that is one of the things we struggle with. So we have two other programs, Improving Lives and Connected Society, that are looking at much more at societal issues. And one of the things we're looking at is what are the metrics that we can come up with for those. Maybe the currency exchange is even further down the line. But I still think the general idea of net positive as a broader concept can be applied. It may just be that the sides of the equation aren't as quantifiable, as readily quantifiable.
So I think that's absolutely right. When you ask which parts of the equation are replicable by any industry, I think the supply chain side, broadly speaking, is replicable across any industry. And you're absolutely right that the net good side of it is something which you have to take a view on. It's much more of a judgment call, and as you say, it differs wildly between industries, and you need to come back to that transparency thing, which is to say, okay, this is how we looked at it, this is why we looked at it in this way, and this is how it took us to where we got to.
I think there's also a question of informed choices, particularly at the consumption end. If you look at red meat, there's no question. Most people would say, well, red meat has a high carbon impact. It does. And therefore, I'd be better off being vegetarian than being a red meat eater. Same time, the red meat industry has got its act together and has realised that a significant proportion of the impact of red meat is actually on the fertiliser and the use of the fertiliser. Another significant proportion is in flatulence. And both of those areas are areas that can be addressed very effectively. So you can actually have a lower impact red meat, very significantly lower. But that industry is responding to it because it knows it has to. Now, if you actually explain all of that, you can actually give people informed choices. And I think informed choices are absolutely fundamental. I do get reluctant to say, well, actually, we shouldn't be doing something. Because almost always there is a better way of doing it that might be more competitive and might therefore be a good choice. I think actually understanding, as Mike's saying, what those choices are is incredibly empowering. And it's programs such as this applying across a number of sectors that will start to map out your ready reckoner so that as you go through life, you realise the things you do that have a big environmental impact and the things you do that simply don't. And then you can start making choices. That's a far more likely route to success, I think, than anybody trying to regulate and say, we're not going to eat red meat.
Okay, so we're talking about informed choices that requires a certain level of awareness. I mean, something you've worked on a lot, Mike. And you might look at Sainsbury's and BT, both huge customer networks, and I don't watch an awful lot of television, but the last BT ad I saw was about, does the guy get the girl or not? But he's got a lousy internet connection, so he never quite knows. And Sainsbury's is, good food costing less, the housewife. How, to what extent can this be, these tools like NetGood, like their 2020 commitment, be a tool for really educating the consumer, partly to be making those informed choices, but to be both, and then beyond that, to be demanding something that makes NetGood go from 3 to 1 to 4 to 1 and so on and so forth?
Well, just really, none of these numbers tell you what to do, but you're absolutely right. They inform what you might do. So just to talk very quickly about another smaller supermarket that I work with up in the northwest called Booths, which has been mapping out all its carbon and so on. And what it's finding is that it doesn't tell it what to do, but it does open up a big and wide-ranging conversation about all kinds of options. So on the subject of red meat, there's what it can do in its red meat supply chains, but there's also the question of they've realised actually we can reposition red meat as a very high value, very attractive, eat in small quantities for a special occasion product, and actually they think that's a commercial opportunity for them. So it opens up all kinds of all kinds of informed choices and and sourcing decisions as well. None of which are black and white, because it's about putting one thing into the mix, into your decision mix, which you then look at from a very broad and multi-criteria perspective.
Kevin, coming back more specifically to the ICT piece and net good, I mean, we've seen from the Smart 2020 report and the Smarter 2020 report the huge potential that information technology has for reducing global emissions, perhaps somewhere between 15 to 20% of global emissions over the next decade by deployment of the technologies that BT uses. So where do you see the biggest opportunities there are? You've laid out you've mentioned 9 technologies, you've mentioned some of them specifically that you'll be rolling out to your customers that will achieve that abatement. Mm-hmm. Where do you see at the macro level, the big opportunities? And looking beyond 3 to 1 and net good in 2020, what does success look like for you?
The big opportunities are in the areas I mentioned: smart city, smart energy, smart transport, connected home. The beyond 2020, you want me to go?
I've
spent the last 2 years trying to get to 2020.
Look like on a big scale?
Success looks like, what does success look like to me is we meet 3 to 1 early, and we put the target up. And we've done it in a way that has driven innovation and has helped us drive new products and propositions out to customers, so that the success of the business is inherently linked to having met our net good targets.
Yeah, I just add one thing. The net good programme is reality-based. It's grounded in what BT has to offer today broadly and the products that it is anticipating offering in the period going forward to 2020. There's enormous opportunity in building sustainability into the future products and services that we're all going to enjoy, and indeed infrastructure. The opportunity to develop more sustainable products and services really is only just been, we've only just got there. Most of what we enjoy today is incredibly inefficiently produced, is incredibly demanding on resources, and therefore is not sustainable. We've done a lot of work with the likes of Dyson, looking at parametric models, so that every time you design a new bit of Dyson kit, you actually understand the water, the waste, the materials, and the energy implications as you are designing it. Now, it's pretty clear that you can also make a more profitable bit of kit if you reduce the input costs of all of those things. So there's a really good reason for people to use it. That's high tech, low tech. We've done the same bit of work with JCB. You would be amazed how many tractor and agricultural equipment manufacturers around the world still treat steel as being a very cheap commodity. It is, but it's a very inefficient, from a global point of view, way of achieving ballast. So if you're trying to get something that is heavy, for God's sake, don't use steel. Use concrete.
Okay, interesting. So, thinking, this is the next part of the day is going to be the much more interactive part. So to create a bit of a segue into that, I'd like to ask the three of you, not Kevin, what would be the questions you'd want to hear answered in the workshops and from BT, and what were the questions, and what would be the challenges you would put to BT to go bigger, better, and faster?
I think one of the areas we need to work up is how we use the supply chain management information, because we have some broad brush analysis. We have ways of refining that. It'll never be perfect, but we have ways of digging into key areas in a more bespoke way. But just working through, how exactly can that be most beneficial for suppliers? How can suppliers engage with it best? How can we make sure that all the best policies and practices that anyone could put in place can be properly reflected in BT's supply chain assessments? I think there's an area there.
Okay, Tom.
Yeah, I think if I was to ask a question of BT, it would be, to what degree the work that is being done here could be shared with the consumer, with the user of BT services, so that they understand the benefits of doing certain things, not simply see it as a ratio in an internal programme, which I think is important. And I think it's an enormous opportunity for BT that would pay off in terms of response. For every other business, the question would be, how aspirational is the business? Do you really aspire to be a leader? In which case, what does that mean? And then, what sector are you in? There are an awful lot of businesses in different sectors where they will see this as being an aspiration that's going to be very difficult for them to achieve. I think actually there's something in here for almost every sector. And I think just addressing that and thinking through, okay, I understand the basic principles. It's not going to be totally relevant, directly transferable, but how could I make it work for me?
Okay, Paul.
Yeah, for me, I think what would be good for me would be to understand where the group here is in terms of engagement with their boards in sustainability, and is it really real? And really to hopefully allow everybody to understand that sustainability, doesn't need to cost the earth. Literally, it's not a commercial affront. It does make business sense.
Good. And Kevin, you can respond a little bit to that. Also, tee up some of the conversation you'd like to have after the break. What are the things, what would you really like to go? We've got some questions, and the people that I'll explain a bit more, there'll be a set of questions that people will be asked to discuss. But, walking away from having heard some of this conversation, the presentations you've made, what do you really want to know, and what would really help you going forward?
Well, so just one reflection on what was just said, which is very interesting that Mike talked about suppliers. Tom, you referred to consumers, and Paul, you talked about boards and businesses. The other aspect of this that we need to keep in mind is investors as well, and how can we make that? And I'm sure if there'd been a fourth person, we would have got to that. But so I'll put that one out there as well. That's a very important part of the mix for us, and how all of this then comes together so that there's a sort of a mutual benefit is really key. This afternoon there are a number of tables. Now I think we've tried to group people with common interests, with the person from BT and perhaps people who have helped us with the methodology who are best suited to that. So we're looking for as broad a range of feedback as we can get at this point from topics like, well, how can we use this to engage consumers? And we're looking for your ideas as much as your questions. So by all means ask the question. By all means, other people around the table answer it. The BT people really are sitting there to hear and to sort of try and pull the answers together. As broad as that, down to some specifics as to, well, why did you do the methodology that way? Now, there may not be exactly the right people on each table, but we can have a few floaters as well. I'll be floating around for that. We really want to start with that breadth. So if there's an area that's important to you, even if it didn't come up today, we need to know that, because that really, starting with that broad picture is what's going to give us the best value as we move this methodology forward and work out how to leverage it the best.
Great. Well, first let's thank our 4 panellists for their contribution. And although it's clear, although we didn't invite climate skeptics or cynics deliberately to be on this panel, I think these are, without wishing to sound patronising, a serious bunch of people representing serious businesses, and all have concluded that through one route or another, putting climate change and sustainability at the heart of their businesses, upstream, downstream, and at the heart of their operations, is not just a nice thing to do, it's good for business. And I think part of the process, building on what Kevin's just said, after the break, will be understanding how and why. And it's both the mechanics of it, but also the consumer engagement.